Okay, Rabbi Isai, let's continue with our discussion on Tevilas Keilim, part 2. So as we said, glass requires Tevilah Midrabanan with a bracha. But as we said, earthenware, ceramic, porcelain, clay, all these things do not require Tevilah at all. Is there a chumrah of being toivel them? Only if you like the smell of mikvah water. If not, there's no reason. Okay, what about glazed utensils? Glazed, was is this? What does glaze mean? Glaze means, actually, when you have a ceramic or earthenware or something like that, plate, mug, kli, whatever it is, and there's a layer of glass on top of it. So the primary kli is earthenware, doesn't need tefillah, but it's covered by glass. Does that require tefillah? So it is a big old machlokes. The Meister of Yaakov Emden, the Gillian Marsha, more Heintig or Moshe Feinstein say, by a glazed utensil, there is no tefillah required. However, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the Ben Ish Chai, they say that tefillah is required, but don't make a bracha. Comes the Aruch HaShulchan, and he says tefillah is required with the bracha. So what would we do on one of those glazed utensils? We're going to do tefillah without a bracha. One of these olden day glazed utensils. Now, there definitely is what to rely on if somebody doesn't want to do tefillah at all. There is a Rabbi Yaakov Emden, a Gileon, and a Rabbi Moshe. So there are people that have the minhag not to toivel such kelim. But if you don't have a minhag, then the right thing would be to toivel it without a bracha. Now, some of the modern day poskim actually bring up that the metzias has changed. That's the olden day glazing. However, nowadays the layer of glass that covers these earthenware or porcelain plates are so thin. I don't remember the number, like 1/100 of an inch or something like that. And if they're so thin, there's reason to say that they actually do not require tefillah at all. Even according to the Manda Amrim that would have required tefillah, nowadays they don't require. So therefore, Lamaisa, there's a good reason to say they shouldn't require. However, still, in most places, the minhag is to be toivel. So that Bubby's China, it needs to be toiveled. Okay, now, apparently, by the way, one thing to point out is the mugs, they still have a thick, your regular ceramic coffee mug, it still has a thick layer of glass, and therefore it's not the modern day discussion, but it's rather more of the old discussion, and therefore we would certainly, if you don't have a minhag otherwise, tell you to be toivel without a bracha. Okay, just a public service announcement. Corel is glass. Corel is not ceramic. Corel is not earthenware. Corel is glass, and therefore requires tefillah midrabanan with a bracha. Now, what about the other way? So when metal is coated with something else, let's say you have metal and it's coated with something that is not chayav in tefillah, would that require tefillah? So let's think. Anyways, what would be the example? Metal coated with something else? Yeah. How about a metal frying pan coated with Teflon? A metal frying pan coated with Teflon? Pretty much the same machlokes in the opposite direction. What do we paskin? Tefillah without a bracha. So if you have a pot or a pan that has a Teflon coating, it would require tefillah without a bracha. Okay. Just also a point that we didn't mention in the past. According to the vast majority of poskim, rubber does not require tefillah. Okay, now a tripod, the Shulchan Aruch says in Kuf Chaf Siman Yudalid, Sif Yudalid, Siman Kuf Chaf Sif Yudalid, that a tripod which is used to hold the pot on top of a fire does not require tefillah. Why not? You're using it in the cooking. Answer, because it's not touching the food. Only something that touches the food directly requires tefillah. But something which does not touch the food does not require tefillah. Okay, why not? Because if it doesn't touch the food, it's not a kli suda. Only kli suda requires tefillah. This does not. Now, what type of hefsek takes away the requirement of tefillah? So certainly, if the food doesn't touch it and you put a pot or a pan on top of that rack, then tefillah would not be required. Now, the Minchas Shlomo Zalman Auerbach points out that if you cover the kli with paper or with foil, that is not considered something that's just batal to the kli, and therefore the tefillah would require tefillah. Even though the food doesn't actually touch the kli, the paper or the aluminum foil, which is pretty much just protecting the cleanliness of the kli, that kli would still require tefillah. However, if you put the item in a bag, and then you put the bag into the kli, then the kli would not require tefillah. So let's say you have your special, crock pot that you use for your navel pastrami. Don't worry, ask the American next to you, they'll explain to you what a navel pastrami is. So it's pretty much a pastrami that you put in this thick plastic bag and you cook it like that. By the way, this is the Hadmana issues that we have to discuss on Shabbos. Leave it a little bit out of the water, not for now. But the point for now is that pastrami is never touching the crock pot. It's resting in a bag. So if your crock pot specifically for navel pastrami, no tefillah on that crock pot. Oh, but isn't the crock pot earthenware? Yeah, but it's glazed with glass. Remember? Glazed with glass, the crock pot would require tefillah without a bracha. What about the lid of the crock pot? Well, that's glass. So that's ironic. The crock pot itself, normal for cholent. The crock pot would require tefillah without a bracha. The lid would require with a bracha. But if you don't use this crock pot ever for cholent, you only use it for navel pastrami, no tefillah required at all, because it's in the bag and the pastrami doesn't touch the crock pot at all. Geschmack, eh? Okay. I'm not just talking about the navel pastrami, I'm talking about the kishkas of the sugya. I know, not kishka of the cholent. Okay, gewaldig. Now, fine. What about items that are sometimes used for food and sometimes for other uses? Sometimes food is put directly on this item, on this kli, and sometimes it is not. Does it require tefillah? So, the Shulchan Aruch and Ramah discuss cases of a sheichet's knife, and they also discuss cases of a parchment cutting knife, and based on the Tevilas Keilim, there's different ways of explaining them, so it's very complicated to get to the conclusion. So I'm just choosing some of the other heteruim to make it easier to get to the conclusion that is working with the Shulchan Aruch Ramah. So like this. The Pri Chadash and Piskei Tshuva and Ben Ish Chai say we follow Roiv usage. So Pri Chodesh, Piskei Tshuva, Ben Ish Chai, we follow Roiv usage. So this box cutter, or forget it, this knife, let's keep it actually simple. This knife, 60% of the time you use it to cut pizza, 40% of the time you use it to cut boxes, you have to tevel it. But if this knife, 60% of the time you use it for boxes, and 40% of the time you use it for pizza, no tefillah required. Zakt Aruch HaShulchan, and he says that if the item is used bikfiyas, meaning that it's a normal occurrence, it's not a once-off, it's not a strange situation, even if it's a miyut, we would still require tefillah. So even if it's, this knife, 80% of the time I use this knife for boxes, 20% of the time I use it for pizza. I know, cleanliness. Okay, 20% of the time I use it for pizza. Zakt Aruch HaShulchan, since you have it, it's on your schedule, it's kavua, it's normal for you, you require tefillah. So, and by the way, the Ben Ish Chai takes this a step further. I just want to point out something that I wanted to say a drop earlier. And he says, does a glass or metal table need tefillah? Is that the Ben Ish Chai? No. Since raiv of its usage is with a plate, no tefillah is required. So does somebody have to be toivel their table? I'm not going to get involved yet into how you are toivel your table. I'm aware that is complicated. But can somebody be toivel their table? Do they have to? I'm sorry. Do they have to be toivel their glass or metal table? So let's think about this. So perhaps I would suggest if somebody's in Deal or Netivot and they're a nice good Svardi, so we have the Pri Chodesh and the Ben Ish Chai saying we follow raiv usage. Most of the time you use a plate. Therefore, your metal glass table does not require tefillah. Or let's say somebody is a Yeki in Washington Heights. And let's face it, he would never put food directly on the table. He would always use a plate. What are you, crazy? To put food directly on the table? Also, no tefillah required because you would never put food directly on the table. What if you live in Borough Park? Yeah, regular, normal, Haimish Yid, even if you're in Brooklyn, 5 towns, whatever, But let's have fun with Borough Park. You're in Borough Park. Yeah, Haimish Yid. Let's face it, when your mother's not looking, when your wife's not looking, there's no plates around, put a slice of pizza on that table, put a piece of kugel on the table. Yeah, shh. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell. The secret's safe with me. But if we all know that happens a little bit, and it's not just a once-off situation, but that's what you do. When you don't have a plate handy, you stick it directly on the plate. We're not going to rely on the Ben Ish Chai and the Piskei Tshuva. We're going to have to be machmir for the Aruch HaShulchan l'cha'ira, and therefore one would be required l'cha'ira to toivel their table. Okay, there's going to be other eitzes we're going to discuss later. Hopefully one of them will apply. But if it's a little complicated to be toivel your table, don't get me wrong, it'd be geschmack. Put the table on top of the car, bring it to the beach and get the boys involved. It'd be a fun story. It'd be a geschmack experience. But no, I'm not saying everybody has to do that. Okay. Or you could just never eat on the table, but let's face it. Okay. Now, the Minchas Yitzchak clarifies an important point. These halachas that we just said, the Aruch HaShulchan, etc., that was by an item that is designed to be used for food. However, an item which is designed not to be used for food, designed for other uses, can be used on occasion for food without tefillah. So let's say you have your box cutter, which, you use it for cutting boxes. Once in a blue moon, you can't find the pizza cutter, so you're going to take out the box cutter to cut the pizza. So in such a case, you would not require tefillah on your box cutter. So one more time, if it was your knife, even 90% of the time you use your knife for boxes, 10% for pizza, you require tefillah. But if it's your box cutter, and 90% of the time you use it for boxes, 10% of the time you use it for pizza, once in a while use it for pizza, no tefillah would be required. Okay, let's say you want to crack a nut with a hammer, so you do not need to toivel the hammer. Because, you normally use the hammer for banging nails or whatever else you use the hammer for. Once in a while you crack a nut, no tefillah is required. Now, what about this? I was thinking about an interesting case. I bet this is common. This guy, a guy who's into nuts, he likes nuts. He eats nuts, every here and there, every couple of days. Every Shabbos, he's eating a nut. And, especially whenever he has guests and he has nuts and he says, let me get the hammer. And everybody says, what do you get to a hammer? And he wants to show off that he knows the Hilchos Muktzah. He says, no, it's a Kli Shematla Isser. I'm using a L'tzarech Mekoymai. I'm allowed to do it, no problem. It's Kishmak. Fine. And every Shabbos, every second Shabbos, every third Shabbos, he's cracking nuts with his hammer. And you ask him, when was the last time you actually banged in a nail? I don't know. I think a couple of years ago. Do you use a hammer at all for like building stuff? I don't know, not really. I don't really do much around my house. Tevel your hammer with a bracha! Geschmack. This guy's going to need a tevel his hammer. Bring your hammer to the mikvah and have everybody give you a funny look because your hammer needs tefillah. There might actually, a bracha might be what to debate actually, because I just point out that when it comes to a nutcracker, if you use it for nuts, the type of nuts, that the nutcracker only touches the shell of the nut, but doesn't touch the actual nut. So Shlomo Zalman says you require tefillah because the shell is part of the nut, is part of the food. But Moshe Feinstein and the Shevet Levi say that no tefillah is required because it doesn't touch the actual food. They consider only the edible part of the food, not the shell. Okay, what about an oven? Does an oven require tefillah? Uh-oh. I now have to tevel my hammer, and they're going to tell me to be tevel my oven? No, don't worry. So your oven does not require tefillah. You know why? Because the food doesn't touch your oven unless you mess up and it spills and it overflows and whatever. We don't want to do that type of stuff, right? So the food is not meant to touch your oven. So therefore, you would not require tefillah on that oven. You know, I was thinking, they have in the shuk this guy. You know, he takes this thin bread and he puts it on the side of the oven. You know, he's been doing it since like 1826, I think. And he makes bread by smacking it on the side of the oven. So that already is not so simple. We're going to get to soon the potential heter of mechuber l'karka being too big to be a kli, etc. There might be other heterim. But from this standpoint, the food actually touches the oven. And that's how it used to be once upon a time. But nowadays, with most normal people, the food does not touch the oven, and therefore the oven would not require tefillah. What about the racks? So, if you always put stuff on a pot or a pan before it goes into the oven, then once again, no tefillah will be required. Because the food does not touch the racks. The food touches the pot, which touches the racks. Now, let's say you put things on foil. You know, I don't always put it, I'm making pizza. So what do? I put stuff in the foil. I don't want to waste the pan for this. Baltashchus. So I just put a piece of foil there. So, as we said previously, according to Minchas Shlema, the foil doesn't count. Foil is bottled to the rack. And therefore, that's considered as if it's, on the rack more or less. And therefore, l'chayra, you would assume tefillah would be required. Wait a second, there's a Yad Ephraim that's going to try to help us. The Yad Ephraim says something which is kavua in a mechuber l'karka doesn't require tefillah. So there's 2 points there. Something that's mechuber, that's kavua in the mechuber l'karka is considered like the mechuber l'karka, and the mechuber l'karka doesn't require tefillah. The mechuber l'karka means something attached to the ground. So the oven's like attached to the ground, and the rack is set in the oven, and therefore the Yad Ephraim, the rack would not require tefillah. The Chelkas Yaakov gives a famous heter, which is a great chiddush. He says that since an electrical appliance could only work when it is plugged in, we're not talking about battery operated, since the electrical appliance could only work when it's plugged into the wall, therefore, it is considered mechuber l'karka, and therefore it is pater from tefillah. Now that is quite a chiddush, because that's mechuber l'karka, just because it gets some electricity from the wall. Okay. Now I heard from a Rav Zimmerman from London that he heard from the son of the Chelkas Yaakov that the Chelkas Yaakov was a great Rav in Switzerland. So this Rav Zimmerman heard from the son of the Chelkas Yaakov that the Chelkas Yaakov only said this din by something that is completely useless when not being plugged in, an immersion blender. What could you do with an immersion blender when it's not plugged in? No, hitting your brother in the head doesn't count. What are you going to do with the immersion blender? There's nothing to do with it when it's not plugged in. As opposed to an urn that isn't plugged in, it could still hold water. So it's not completely useless. So apparently the Chalkas Yaakov only said this on a immersion blender type of keli and not on a urn type of keli. However, the interesting thing is nobody quotes the Chalkas Yaakov in this way. Nobody quotes the Chalkas Yaakov as only referring to these type of kelim. So do we rely on his son's explanation? He probably got us right. It is his son. There's the concept that the Kesef Mishnah quotes says. He says, I have a pshat in the Rambam that the Rambam didn't really have his kavana, but once he said it, it becomes the chefs of Torah, and I could read whatever kavana I want into the words. Could one do that to the Chalkas Yaakov? I don't know exactly how this works. It's food for thought. So tzarchin exactly where he said it. Okay. But Lamaisi, even what he did say, most argue, and say mechuber l'karka still requires tefillah. And many argue and say mechuber l'karka still requires tefillah. And almost everybody argues with this chiddush that electrical appliance which is plugged in is considered mechuber l'karka. What are you talking about? Even when it's unplugged, it's a kli. It's still a ganz fine working kli. So it's unplugged. It's a ganz fine working kli. And therefore, most poskim argue with the Chalkas Yaakov. L'maisa, I would say one should not rely on the Chalkas Yaakov and not be toivel a electrical appliance. However, this could be used as a sniff later. It could be used as one of multiple factors combining to be matter a keli from being toiveled. Okay, so once again, would an oven require tefillah? No, because the food doesn't touch it. What about the racks? So we said the Yad Ephraim, according to the Rav, Yad Ephraim, since kavua and mechuber l'karka would not require it. But most of us don't hold to the Yad Ephraim. Now, the question is going to really come down to, do you put food directly on those racks? So if you never put food directly on the racks, you always put it in a pot and pan, no tefillah required. If all the time you always put food on the racks, so then we could say that you should be toivel it. You should be toivel it without a bracha. Now, what if you most of the time put food into pots and pans, and sometimes you put it onto foil, paper, etc.? In such a case, I think there's enough sniff leheter to be mater, not to be toivel this rack. Because first of all, you have the Chalkas Yaakov. Secondly, you have the Yad Ephraim. You also have, I should maybe speak it out. You have the Chalkas Yaakov that's plugged in. You have the Yad Ephraim that's kavua and mechuber l'karka. You have the Berish Chai, the Piskei Tshuva, and the Chalkas Yaakov that most of the time it's used not directly with the food. And even for the Aruch HaShulchan that would be machmer for, it's still not mamish directly. It's on tin, etc. I think we could combine all those things together to be makel. Okay, what about a toaster? Does a toaster require tefillah? So does a toaster require tefillah? So, no, you don't put food on directly in the toaster. But the rack, the tray of the toaster, that l'chara would require tefillah with a bracha. What about a pop-up toaster? A pop-up toaster is like the things that you put bread or half a bagel into it, and when it's ready, it pops up. You know what I'm talking about? So, would that require tefillah? Now, if you would ask me, I would say, definitely yes. Be toivel with a bracha. It touches the food. What's the shayla? But, what could I do? Rav Moshe Feinstein says, no tefillah required. Why not? Zakt Rav Moshe, because it doesn't do anything significant. You put edible bread in there before, you take out edible bread when it's done, it's insignificant, the difference, and no tefillah is required. What a chiddush. I don't hear it, unfortunately. I would say still be toivel without a bracha. Once again, I just want to be clear. Most poskim don't agree with Rav Moshe. It's not. I'm not taking on Rav Moshe with my boxing gloves. I'm too scared to do that. I would get KO'd in 3 seconds flat. I'm talking. The most poskim disagree with this Rav Moshe, and I seem to hear most poskim. But I'm just not going to tell you to make a bracha against Rav Moshe. But I think a toaster does a lot to the food. It does a lot more to the food than all these utensils that are touching the food along the way. I don't know. Sarachin. Okay. Does a microwave require tefillah? So I would say no, because the food doesn't touch the microwave. What about the glass tray of the microwave? So it depends. Do you ever put food directly in the microwave? So if you sometimes put food directly in the microwave, then the answer would be l'chayra, yes, you should require tefillah. Now, what about with a bracha? Yes, you should require tefillah with a bracha if it's normal and you often put food on the tray of the microwave, the l'chayra, you should require tefillah with a bracha. But wait a second. What about the Reb Moshe? Surely, just like we said, the toaster doesn't do anything significant, so too the microwave doesn't do anything significant. Well, I think it depends. There's different people that use microwaves differently. If you only use the microwave to warm up cold food, then I would say that Reb Moshe of toast would apply to warming up the food in a microwave. However, if you use the microwave to, okay, mommy's not home for dinner, let's put some potatoes in there for 27 minutes until it either makes a baked potato or blows up the kitchen, then you're using it for actual cooking, and tefillah would be required. I was actually thinking of something that people actually commonly cook in the microwave. I thought I had a great idea, because I'm like, microwave popcorn. That's for sure chashuv, when you go and you turn it from kernels into popcorn. The thing is, that gets made in a bag, so that doesn't actually touch the glass, and therefore that wouldn't make the glass required in tefillah. So once again, I would shy away from making a bracha on that glass, unless you are a habitual potato maker in the microwave. I would shy away from making a bracha on that glass. Okay. What about another well-known heter? It's brought by the Mincha Shlema, but it's really based on a Rav Kiva Eger. The Rav Kiva Eger says a case of a pot that's too big to be brought into the mikvah. And Rav Kiva Eger says you should make a hole in the pot and patch it up. What does that help? You as a Jew patch it up, and therefore it's made by a Yid. So Shlomo Zalman brings this Mincha Shlema as a lemaisa, that what you could do is you could deassemble the pot. Disassemble? Is that a word? You deassemble the pot, and then you reassemble a pot. Are you Jewish? If you listen to this share, I hope you're Jewish. And therefore, it was made by a Jew. If it's made by a Jew, perfect, no tefillah required. Excellent. What exactly do you have to do? What degree of a job do you have to do? So, as Rav Shlomo Zalman brings down, it has to be a meisa uman. It has to be a professional job. So what about cutting the plug, the wire, and re-putting it back together? So I think most poskim hold that is not considered enough of a meisa uman. Since there are many, many people that could do that, therefore it's not a professional job, and therefore that would not count. But if you have somebody who could do a professional job of taking it apart and putting it back together, that would certainly work. Okay. Now, there's a heter that's given by Rav Heinemann and others, of the Rav Heinemann of Starkey, that says an item that will definitely break when you are toivel it can't be toiveled because it's going to break, and therefore, since it can't be toiveled, it has no chi of tefillah, and it could therefore be used without tefillah. One more time, this item it will for sure break, so it's impossible to toivel. Once it's impossible to toivel, it's like a oinus, and there's no chi of tefillah. Once there's no chi of tefillah, you could use it without tefillah. Quite a chiddush, eh? A lot of people have tainas on this. Rabelsky from the OU. Rabelsky from Rabelsky. Rabelsky has a taina on this. And he says that, what does that mean you can't do anything? You could sell to a guy. There's another heter which we didn't discuss yet, of selling to a guy. You could sell to a guy. It's not like there's nothing you could do. And so I heard a Rav ask, the Rav Kiva Eger says when he had this big, huge pot that couldn't be toiveled, he didn't say, nothing we could do, it can't be toiveled, too big, don't worry about it, it's all good. He said, put a hole in it and patch it up. So therefore, it's not so simple, this heter that Rav Heinemann brings. I have a hard time saying to rely on this heter from Heinemann. However, I think that it certainly could be used as a sniff heter. Oh, I forgot one thing to mention. The basis or the makar, the sushtel that Rav Heinemann is working off. There's a halacha that a kli, which is partially owned by a Jew, partially owned by a guy, there's no chi of tefillah. Why not? Because the second that you're toivel it, who's it owned by? Jew and guy. So it will re-get its tumas akum will resurface on it a second later. You can't get away with that tumas akum if it's still owned by a guy. So if it's still owned by a guy, you can't get rid of the tumas akum. So what does it help? What's the point in going and toiveling it? And since there's no point in toiveling it, then you do not have a chiyuv of tefillah. There's no chiyuv of tefillah if you're not going to accomplish anything. So Zakt, Rav Heinemann, and that's how the Avnei Nezer explains it, etc. So Zakt Rav Heinemann, so too over here, it's impossible to be toivel, and therefore you don't have to be toivel it. But once again, Rebelsky wasn't very happy with it. A lot of poskim aren't happy with it. There's a kasha from Rakiv Eger. And once again, I would say that it could be used as a sniff laheter. Now, I would just also personally say something. In a way, it's like coming a little bit from like, okay, we need to find a heter. We need to find a way for this to work. But, I don't need to find a heter to eat a cheeseburger. There's some things that just don't work. And it just doesn't work. Now, I'll skip to this point to get a little fun. This is like the biggest shayla in Tevilas Keilim. Everybody's hacking a Keurig machine. The K-pod, the K-cups of coffee. Now, does that machine require tefillah? So, some people say with absolute confidence, it will for sure break if you're toivel it. Others say with absolute confidence, if you do it, you stick it right in and right out. So, it won't anyways, and you leave it outside for 2 weeks, it'll be fine, it won't break. So the mitzias is a little complicated because I hear contrary mitzias on the same object. So does the Keurig machine need tefillah? So another question is the outside's plastic, the inside apparently is metal. There's another question in mitzias. Does the water actually get into all those inner compartments, or does it not actually get into the inner compartments? Now, I would say if it doesn't really get into the inner compartments, you might have a heter of belua, which is that something that's very internal to whether it's a person being toivel or whether it's a kli being toivel. If the water can't get there, then no tefillah required. So that's not such an issue. So if it will for sure break, you might have the Rav Heinemann. But as I said, I don't really want to rely on the Rav Heinemann. Well, you also have the Chalkas Yaakov, because it's an electric thing that gets plugged in. I'll tell you like this. This is what I was thinking. I was thinking if you cut the cord of the Keurig machine, I think they're already, and re-put it back together, I think we have enough sniffim to rely on to be matis. We have the Rav Heinemann who says it can't be toiveld and therefore doesn't require tefillah. We have the Chalkas Yaakov who says it's mechuber l'karka. And if you have this kacha debatable made by a yid, I think l'chayr, if we combine all of them, it should work. But I'm not saying this with a strong, powerful, it's pashid. I'm saying l'chayr, we could be mekel in such a case. But it's quite I don't know. You didn't like coffee, so it's very close to many people's hearts, and it's a tough question. And people feel like they need a heter. I don't know. I'm a little nervous still about it, but I think we could be mater. Also, the other side that maybe the metal parts that are inside are belua, and it really depends on which parts. And I don't know. I never took apart a Keurig machine, so I'm a little bit shooting in the dark. Okay. Next heter. I would like to also point out something that I said last week, but I think I want to make a slight alteration to what I said. Something that's used with raw food. Only with raw food. So we quoted last week the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah doesn't argue that tefillah is not required. The Shach says tefillah is not required. The Taz requires tefillah without a bracha. And therefore, I said last week it doesn't require tefillah, but I want to go back on that. And I want to say the raw food, the thing that's only used with raw food, it should be toiveled without a bracha. But once it's complicated to be toivel it, or there's some big tzark, some issue, then we can rely and not toivel it. It's not, once again, when you have the Shulchan Aruch Ramah Shach one way, that's the Ikar Halacha. But in the Ma'aseh, we should try to accommodate for the Taz if possible. There's another heter that's used for things that are hard to be toivel, which is selling to a guy. Now, you sell the item to the guy, and then you borrow back from the guy like forever. Now, the Ramah and the Mishnah Berurah were not very pleased with this heter. Come on, who are you fooling? There's a lot of harama. It's a lot of trickery that's going on here. We all know it's not a real sale. I know. On Pesach, we rely on some debatable things, but this may be even worse. So, could we rely on such a thing? Let's face it, most people know it's a joke, this sale. Doesn't really count. Now, Rebelsky, he used to, once again, is doing this mostly for commercial kitchens, which had massive machinery. So he would sell the stuff to a guy, but he would have the guy make 12 different kinyanim. He was doing Meshicha and Mokoim and Hagbah and Chalipin and Sudar and I don't know what he was doing, and a kinyan agav, and with the shtar, al peh, with a handshake. He had 12 different kinyanim going on there to make this happen. And he had different rules that it had to fit into. I'm cool with that. For whoever's able to do the Rebelsky style, intense 12 kinyanim type of thing, all right, that's a real kinyan to the guy. That I'm okay with. But the stam, when you give it to the guy in the supermarket, the Spanish worker, and you say, this is yours, and you give it back to me, and the guy doesn't even know what the heck you're talking about, that's rubbing me the wrong way. One case of the guy which I am comfortable with is when you have a live-in guy. The Filipino caretaker or the live-in guyish housekeeper, and you tell the guy here, I'm buying it for you, and I just want to be able to borrow it back and leave it in the house. And the guy is going to be able to use it whenever the guy wants to make her own coffee. That I'm really okay with. Because that's not a big harama. That's real. You're giving it to the guy, but you're giving it in a way that you're going to continue to get use. And it works out fine because the guy actually lives in your house. So it's not a shtick and trick that it's staying in your house. It makes sense that it's staying in your house because that's where the guy lives. So in such a case, that I would be comfortable with, and that I would say is okay. And thank you for listening, and have an amazing week.